Okay, we are going to get started with Kavita Does. Kavita writes about culture, race, gender, and their intersections. Nominated for a 2016 Pushcart Prize, her work has been published in CNN, Teen Vogue, Catapult, Fast Company, Ten House, Long Reads, The Atlantic, Los Angeles Review of Books, Guernica, and elsewhere. Her first book, Poignant Song, The Life and Music of Ravi Shankar, was published by HarperCollins India in 2019, and she's at work on her next book, Craft and Conscience, How to Write About Social Issues, which is forthcoming in summer of 2022. Welcome, Kavita.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here along with my fellow readers. And I thought since we're all desperately trying to look forward, instead of reading from Poignant Song, congrats to the winner who won the copy. I thought I'd read from my upcoming book, which is called Craft and Conscience, How to Write About Social Issues. It is inspired by a course that I teach called, writing about social issues through Catapult and elsewhere. And it kind of grew out of my working in social change for 15 years and then coming to writing after that and kind of thinking about the two things together. So the book is going to be part lessons and part reflections and part anthology of my own essays, as well as the essays of writers I really admire who are really adept at writing about social issues in a way that is compelling yet with nuance. So I'm going to read tonight from a piece that's going to be of mine that's featured in the book that was first published in Kenyon Review. So here we go. Selective Perception of Disinformation. 1. There is neither Langston Hughes nor Zora Neale Hurston, but then again, there is no Harlem Renaissance. There is neither Inuit nor Hopi, but then again, there is no tribe. There is no Aretha Franklin, but then again, there is no gospel music. How can there be corruption when there is no economic violence? There is neither Betty Friedan nor Jane Fonda, but then again, there is neither misogyny nor gynecology. There is neither Miles Davis nor Billie Holiday, but then again, there is no Cool. There is neither James Baldwin nor Lorraine Hansberry, but then again, there is no Afro-American. There is no rap music, but then again, there is no boombox. Is there a Krishna if there is no Bhagavad Gita? There is neither Nelson Mandela nor Desmond Tutu, neither Rosa Parks nor Medgar Evers, but then again, there is no white supremacy. There is no Marvin Gaye, but then again, there is no funk. How are there neither internment camps nor Asian Exclusion Act? There is no Margaret Mead, but then again, there is no pesticides. There is no Bob Marley, but then again, there is no reggae. There is no Joseph McCarthy, but then again, there is no Christian radicalism. There is neither Toni Morrison nor Alice Walker, but then again, there is no Sojourner Truth. How can there be endangered species when there is no extinction? There is neither Muddy Waters nor Howlin' Wolf, but then again, there is no rhythm and blues music. There is neither Aborigine nor migrant worker, but then again, there is no Indigenous. There is neither Frida Kahlo nor Isamu Noguchi, but then again, there is neither Pablo Neruda nor Gabriel Garcia Marquez. How can there be a Rumi if there is no Sufi? There is no Charlie Bird Parker, but then again, there is no jam session. There is neither soul music nor soul food, but then again, there are no souls of Black folk. How is there neither homophobia nor racial slur? 2. In 1987, E.D. Hirsch Jr., a respected professor of English at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, publishes a book entitled Cultural Literacy, What Every American Needs to Know. Hirsch, a committed education reformer, decries that American children are lacking basic knowledge about matters of key cultural significance, which would hinder their success as individuals and our society collectively. Included in cultural literacy is a list of 5,000 things, names, proverbs, quotes, and concepts compiled by Hirsch and two of his colleagues, aptly entitled What Literate Americans Know. Hirsch's book and list spark a key battle in the ensuing culture war over what qualifies as culturally significant and who gets to decide. The following year, independent publisher Grey Wolf releases Multicultural Literacy, an anthology in response to the culture war and the works which perpetuated it, in particular Hirsch's cultural literacy. In their introduction, Rick Simonson and Scott Walker, the editors of Multicultural Literacy, note that while they agree with Hirsch's assertion that education needs to be a national priority, they are alarmed by his overriding static and so shallow definition of culture, and conclude that it derives in part from a particular white male academic Eastern US Eurocentric bias. Multicultural literacy is filled with writings on culture from across the decades with a diversity of writers, including James Baldwin, Wendell Berry, Michelle Cliff, Carlos Fuentes, and David Mura, and is dedicated to James Baldwin and Joseph Campbell, two writers who unflinchingly held a mirror up to American society. Simonson and Walker concur that culture is largely contained and carried in the word, and given the inherent problems in Hirsch's list, they create their own supplementary list of close to 600 words not included in the Hirsch book, the sorts of things too commonly excluded from US educational texts, political thinking, or social planning. 3. When I review Simonson and Walker's list of exclusions, I am struck by the vast and varied cultural creations and creators not included in Hirsch's own. I form section 1 by selecting and pairing excluded cultural concepts or creations with their proponents or creators of particular significance to me. I can't imagine my life untouched or my perspective unenriched by them. Yet it lays bare for me the nebulous mechanisms of erasure, which work gradually on an everyday basis as memories fade and work goes unheralded and undocumented, but also in one fell swoop through lists of significance like the one compiled by Hirsch and his colleagues of what every American should know. Ultimately, why would the creator be acknowledged as culturally significant when their creation is not? In truth, although the mechanisms of erasure might be nebulous, they are not foreign to me. For the past 4 years, I've been working on a biography of Ravi Shankar, a Grammy-nominated Indian-American singer who helped to bring Indian music to the West in the late 1960s, yet whose story is all but unknown by the broader public. So as I uncover the contours of her remarkable yet unknown story, I've often pondered the reason it requires uncovering and the forces that have kept it unknown. In 2014, a year after I began working on this biography, I attend the American Cool exhibit at Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., exploring the quintessentially American concept of cool, a concept created by Black American jazz artists of the 1940s, but espoused and embodied by so many American iconic figures over the past 75 years of American cultural history. According to the exhibit notes, cool is an earned form of individuality. Each generation has certain individuals who bring innovation and style to a field of endeavor while projecting a certain charismatic self-possession. They are the figures selected for this exhibition, the successful rebels of American culture. Although Black Americans artists coined the term cool, in part as a transgressive response to the racism they face, they only account for 30 of the 100 figures whose portraits and bios make up the American Cool exhibit. And of the remaining 70, 65 are white, while only 3 are Hispanic and just 2 are Asian American. I walked through the exhibit 3 times in disbelief to come up with these rough tallies. As an Asian American, I'm in search of those from recent decades who inspire me as much with their accomplishments as with their personas, from master musician Ravi Shankar, Lakshmi Shankar's brother-in-law and frequent collaborator, actor George Takei of Star Trek fame, and civil rights activist Yuri Kochiyama, to comedian Margaret Cho, jazz musician Vijay Iyer, and Pulitzer Prize-winning writer Jhumpa Lahiri. Yet they are missing from the walls. Worse yet, when I come to the end of the exhibit, there is a note about how these 100 figures were chosen after much discussion and debate, and since not everyone could be included, they created a runner-up list of another 100, and this list includes no Asian Americans at all. The list of what literate Americans know contained in cultural literacy was created 30 years ago by 3 individuals. Meanwhile, American Cool, a national exhibit at the Smithsonian, was conceptualized and shaped just 3 years ago by many individuals through, as noted, discussion and debate. So what do you do when your opponent in a resurgent battle of the cultural war is the Museum of National Record, whose bare walls serve as a stark reminder of your erasure, not just from cultural history, but present day culture? You wield your only weapon, the almighty pen, to bear witness to this latest instance of selective perception of disinformation. which too are terms excluded from Hirsch's list of cultural literacy. 5. On November 8, 2016, nearly 30 years after the publication of Hirsch's Cultural Literacy and 29 years following that of Gray Wolf's Multicultural Literacy, America elects Donald Trump, a morally bankrupt but cash-flush businessman with no government experience, who ran a campaign rife with hate speech, playing into the fears and hopes of white nationalists and disaffected white Americans alike. With his trademark red baseball cap bearing his slogan, "Make America Great Again," Trump on the campaign trail reignites the culture war, making clear that his vow to build a wall along the US southern border and his calls to keep Syrian refugees out, his view on who and what makes America great. Unlike Hirsch's inadvertent erasure from his list of the contributions made by marginalized people to American culture, President Trump, with the support of social conservatives, is working concertedly to erase the very lives and rights of vulnerable populations. And he has proposed his own list, a weekly list of the crimes committed by undocumented immigrants, the list of 7 countries he sought to ban travel from through his executive order, among the first he signed in office, the list of health service organizations providing abortion who will no longer be eligible for federal funding, and finally, his list of agencies whose budget he proposes drastically cutting or eliminating, which includes the National Endowments for the Arts, a crucial lifeline for artists and writers. More recently, Trump announced a proposed overhaul to immigration policy favoring highly skilled workers and those who speak English, a sinister echo of the xenophobic English-only language debates of previous years that raged in certain cities and towns in reaction to demographic shifts caused by immigration. And despite a considerable spike in hate crimes against marginalized populations, which accompanied Trump's election, the Department of Justice chose to direct its resources to investigate and sue universities whose affirmative action policies are deemed to discriminate against white applicants. But even as these latest battles rage on, spawning an amorphous resistance movement, what is the broader culture war? Was it sparked 30 years ago in the halls of the ivory towers of academia, or did it start with the founding of this country? Or does it predate even that? Calling it a war when most of the cultural power and weaponry has been historically held by one side is akin to Trump flagrantly assigning blame on both sides for deadly violence perpetrated by white supremacists and neo-Nazis against counter-protesters in Charlottesville, Virginia. Perhaps it is more accurately an enduring and insidious tradition of cultural domination through cultural erasure, replacement, and appropriation. Ironically, it was the potential removal of a statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee, mischaracterized as cultural erasure by those who have grown so used to being culturally dominant, that transformed Charlottesville into a literal and figurative battleground in the culture war. Whatever the framing or nomenclature, there's no doubt this country is embroiled in an imperative and visceral moral struggle for the very human rights its founding documents hold unalienable. Given this real struggle, can we justify our continued engagement in an ideological culture war? Yes, because the culture war and its resulting battles being waged involve and impact those most imperiled by autocratic policies who, not coincidentally, are also those most marginalized in American culture. It might seem futile, perhaps even indulgent, to hold space, to hold a candle up to our threads in the mottled fabric of American cultural history, while just as importantly continuing to create new threads of culture through our work as writers. However, fighting the culture war, or alternately resisting cultural oppression, in the present may be our only chance at securing our legacy, a future where we might seamlessly be seen, heard, and understood as part of what every American should know. Thank you so much. Thank you, Gwen and Adam and Leah, and also to my fellow readers, and of course to all of you. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting. I didn't know that about either the list or the exhibit. I mean, I didn't know they existed. Okay. Meg Day. Deaf, genderqueer poet Meg Day is the author of Last Psalm at Sea Level, winner of the Publishing Triangle's Audre Lorde Award, a recipient of the Amy Lowell Poetry Traveling Scholarship and an NEA Fellowship in Poetry. Day's recent work can be found in Best American Poetry 2020 and the New York Times. Day is Assistant Professor of English and Creative Writing at Franklin and Marshall College. Welcome, Meg.
Thank you. Oh, I'm excited to be here tonight. And thank you to Leah for that kind introduction, and for making this reading series happen, and to Gwen, for everything that you do. Uh, Most importantly, this evening, thank you for prioritizing access in the shape and form and wonder that is Emily Phipps, our ASL interpreter this evening. Thank you to my fellow readers, Kavita and Brionne and Polly, for letting me join you this evening. I'm going to read a few poems, and they are poems that are from my next manuscript, which is it's a difficult thing to talk about because it's still in progress, but it's a project that sort of seeks to unburden itself from non-disabled and hearing expectations. I spent much of my coming up as a poet trying to conform, trying to assimilate, as a deaf poet writing in English. And I was taught to anticipate only hearing readers and hearing audience members, which encouraged me to prioritize a relationship with sound that isn't really all that intrinsic to my experience or my practice as a poet. So in this new work, which is slow going and hard going, I'm trying to unlearn a lot of things. And so some of these poems track that unlearning, but among them, most important to me is I'm thinking about the deaf lyric. What is the deaf lyric? What deaf sonics might look like on the page, and how I can center or recenter my own deafness in the process of making, the pleasure of making, even. Gosh, that there might be pleasure in making. And also in avoiding sort of the compulsory anticipation of readers and audience members who are so disparate from myself. So I'm going to read a few poems that sort of traffic in that. This first one takes its title from a print series from visual artist Louise Bourgeois. It's called 10 a.m. is when you come to me. In some other life, I can hear you breathing, a pale sound like running fingers through tangled hair. I dreamt again of swimming in the quarry and surfaced here when you called for me in a voice only my sleeping self could know. Now the dapple of the aspen respires on the wall and the shades cut its song a staff of light. Leave me, that me, in bed with the woman who said all the sounds for pleasure were made with vowels I couldn't hear. Keep me instead with this small sun that sips at the sky blue hem of our sheets, then dips and reappears, a drowsy penny in the belt of Venus, your aureole nodding slow and copper as it bobs against cotton in cornflower or clay. What a waste the groan of the mattress must be. When you backstroke into me and pull the night up over our heads, your eyes are two moons I float beneath, and my lungs fill with a wet hum, your hips return. It's Sunday, or so you say, with both hands on my chest, and hot breath is the only hymn whose refrain we can recall. And then you reach for me like I could have been another man. You make me sing without a sound. This next poem traffics in, I don't know why I'm using the phrase traffics this evening. I just came from another class where that was being trafficked about. But this next poem and many that I'm working on traffic in the language of, the phrasing of, I don't know, the culture of maybe closed captioning. And I encourage you to use closed captioning, if only because it will expose you to the nuances and the idiosyncrasies and the humor and also the devastation of what transcribed television and movies actually think that they are communicating. Anyway, my favorite closed captioning is inaudible. it comes up in brackets, and it's just the word inaudible, which I find endlessly hilarious, though oftentimes I think the joke is missed on hearing audience members. The idea that you are using text to represent a sound that even the hearing transcriber can't hear, it just tickles me. I find it quite amusing. And so I started borrowing much of the language of closed captioning after I read Gabby Calvacaresi's book Rocket Fantastic. Do y'all know this book? And Gabby substitutes in for pronouns of one of the characters, one of the entities in that book, a symbol instead of a pronoun. And when Gabby reads from that book, instead of reading the symbol, they inhale in place of a pronoun. And so I'm thinking a lot about that. This poem's called Portrait of My Gender as Inaudible. I knew I was a god when you could not agree on my name, and still none you spoke could force me to listen closer. Is this the nothing the antelope felt when Adam lit on his own entitling, dubbed family, genus, species? So many descendants became doctors, delivered babies, bestowed bodies, names, as if to say it is to make it so. Can it be a comfort between us, the fact of my creation? I was made in the image of a thing without an image, and silence too is your invention. Who prays for a God except to appear with answers, but never a body, a voice? If I told you, you wouldn't believe me because I was the one to say it. On the first day, there was no sound worth mentioning. If I too am a conductor of air, the only praise I know is in stereo. One pair, an open hand and closed fist will have to do. I made a photograph of my name. There was a shadow in a field, and I put my shadow in it. You can't hear me, but I'm there. This next poem takes, it's after a line by Nikki Finney, and the line comes from the poem The Oriole, which I think is maybe one of the best poems ever written in English. It's definitely my favorite. After a line by Nikki Finney. It must still be summer because the tent goes up easy in the bluegrass and we loiter past sundown without sleeves. The sunset, one thing we can watch that won't require captioning and isn't each other. What did you say then? Hand cupped to my ear as if it would send more than winter across my arm. What did I believe I knew of language in that moment before everything about me became true? I followed you into the dark like a vowel, a train disappearing into a tunnel at the end of a light. It's night in the tent. And my ears can't help but deny my ears, so it's my hands that go dowsing for sound, the push broom sweep of our sleeping bags and the hourglass sand of their slow unzip. I catch your lip in the gold leaf glare of your neighbor's third shift headlights, wet road rumble in my hips and yellow flashbang symbol through your hair. I don't care how it happened, only that it did. 1 minute, an eternity with you, tracing the bones of my face with your read-along finger, mouthing me out, quiet, common mispronunciation I still let slide between my thighs at the right octave. Another, and you are all wicker, flank, soft muzzle in my palm. What makes a woman who is barely a woman move like this? What secret grammar do you know? I feed apple fingers past eager lips, smacking on 13 plus 1, the heat of you sucking at the M of my name sign, my Girl Scout promise. What part of your body isn't saying my name? Say it again. Say it louder. This is the last night of my life when hands remain only one kind of mouth. Whose tongue is this, and where did you learn it? What made you invent a new chord? Then made me play it like a siren for a 3-alarm fire, summon new gods with their good names, hot at the reed of my jaw like some kind of symphony disarmed of melody. All these questions, and the answer right there at the end of my arm. I'll just read two more poems, a little one and a less little one. September. Harder to say now which way it moved, and only that it idled at the green light of my body, high beam staring steady at the sensor, and my skin lit up like go. Hard to say if there was sun at all, or just the thought of you, as afternoon leaned my shadow right, then left me in the shade. Mercy laid me down last night, and morning came anyway. Sorrow stripped me green from sleep to keep my one eye open. I stayed right here, despite the drive, and even dreamt of stillness, a sundial in snow. I left you last night, the way a station leaves a train. I left the light on anyway. Y'all have been very kind. This is my last poem. It's called In Line to Vote on Our Future Climate. Years from now, after the ice caps and the asteroid, after the stars have died and we receive word of their passing, but before the melting point has sung some lullaby of Mercury, always tugging closer that sun we did not know to fear. After the heat has become so rote, we cannot recreate, much less recollect the feeling of cool or of breeze, and even stones quit carrying any memory of chill. I will think of your body, cracked open at the surface, at the center, like the surface of the Susquehanna in deep December, the cool field of your thigh against my cheek, the creak of me sprung cold from sleep. I will keep for myself the moment before all this, the sand and the wasteland it made of us. The day we woke and green in all its iterations had abandoned us, and with it the earth. After the famine, but before the drought, when you fed my wet breath into the hot terrarium of you still chilled at the edges by less natural disasters. Like the neighbor boy who told you where in the snow you should put your bare hand and for how long you should leave it. How it was returned to you, still fixed to your arm, but so cold it nearly boiled, so blue it was ablaze. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meg. I'm really fascinated by the idea of how creative writing trains some of us to write against our experience, our instincts, etc. Anyway, I'm going to have a question for you about that later in the hour. Okay, our next reader is Brionne Janae. Brionne Janae is a poet and teaching artist living in Brooklyn. They are the author of Blessed Are the Peacemakers, which won the 2020 Cave Canem Northwestern University Press Poetry Prize, and After Jubilee, published by Boat Press. Brionne has received fellowships to Cave Canem, Swanee Writers Conference, Vermont Studio Center, and Hedgebrook. Their poetry has been published in Plowshares, the American Poetry Review, the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day, the Sun Magazine, Jubilat, and Waxwing, among others. Off the page, they go by Breezy. Welcome, Brionne Breezy.
Thank you, Leah. And thank you to Meg and Kavita. Those readings have been wonderful. I can't believe I have to go after that. Really and truly. And I'm very grateful to be here with you guys. I'm going to start my timer and read a poem. Against Confessional. You are not my God. I owe you no debt, nor gratitude, will gift no object, cut and bleed no sacrifice in your name. I offer only my voice, that it catch in your throat, drag you in the rooms you dare not enter, yet fill and fill. I offer you your stink, your rot, your festering wound. I bring no salve, no balm, or nor rag to bite and silence the scream charging up from your diaphragm. I offer you your scream, your voice, your tremble and terror. I carry only a mirror, held at the right angle that you may see and see all. So I'm gonna read some new stuff, some old stuff, all stuff from books that aren't out in the world yet, but that are on their way, you know. So that one is, yeah, that are on their way. This next one I'm gonna read is called Atonement. And it's from my second book, Blessed Are the Peacemakers, which much of that book is sort of unpacking the reality of growing up with a sexual predator in the family without having that spoken of. Yeah. So I'll read this poem first. Atonement. You do not understand the relief at being rid of the dying man. He is only a shape laid out on the couch called Grandpa's brother, his hand resting on the cigarette-scarred carpet as if he hadn't strength to draw it up again. He exists before memory, and yet you still feel the slice of every flex of his lung drawing breath. Here, the origin of your fear of suffering. To your young mind, Grandpa has come here to tend to his brother, ease the passing, lift him on in that great getting up morning, sing the fare-thee-wells. Divorce has not yet licked your tongue, and no one has begun to whisper or name the monster who kept their skin slick with sweat all those long years. Perhaps they are still unlearning the tiptoed walk and glance thrown over the shoulder when the funeral comes, the white walls of the church and sun shining through. You know he must have been there, but cannot find Grandpa in all that light. And yes, this is the trouble with visiting him here, of hearing his revision of the family history. Stop lying. No, it's all too present here. You have always known he could stand in the light all he wanted, but there could be only the faint scent of terror, sense of a stiff hand bending what it will to his will. He should suffer for what he did to those girls. You feel this. You watch his body curl in on itself as he chokes on phlegm, and you wait for his heart to flutter and cease. You try on malice, but it is almost as hard to love suffering. And besides, who are you to say when or if or how anyone atones? But what can wash away my sins? Nothing. Nothing. But the blood of Jesus. You can hear the old mothers even now, fans and tambourines flapping, voices cracked with age but singing still. Often you fear you must be moving further and further from salvation. Feel the Lord less in the organ's wail, the tremble of floorboards beneath the feet of the saints. You are always wondering at the power of this blood and what they say it has allowed them to forget. The hands forced under the skirt, the body bruised and fractured, diseased, carried from some other woman's bed to their own. Some days it is all you can do to hide your disbelief, to pretend you don't feel the memory of it all over them, in the lines of their brow, the faint graze of their lips against your cheek, the squeeze of their hands in yours. So I wrote this poem and much of my second book before I started having flashbacks to being assaulted by my grandfather. And a lot of the work of the book that follows that is sort of talking about that process of remembering and sort of claiming my story and being able to say what happened to me as a survivor of that. And one thing I did recently is do an erasure of that poem that I just read for you all to sort of dig up some truth in there. This poem is currently in no book and may not ever make it into a book. We'll see. So I'm excited to read it for you guys. Atonement, erased. You do not understand memory. the origin of fear, the passing whisper, monster slick with sweat. All those years learning the tiptoed walk. You know he must have, but cannot hear it. Too present, the faint scent of terror, will, his will. You feel his body, choke on his hard love. You say, my sins, nothing but blood. Still, you fear salvation, tremble beneath the feet of saints, allowed to forget the bruised fracture, to hide memory in their hands. And this next one is another longer poem, which is the title poem for the next book, Blessed Are the Peacemakers. It was just published recently at Paperbag Press, so you can find it there. Blessed are the peacemakers. Lord, teach me to bridle my tongue. You don't tell your father what you know of his father, though he has held this truth since long before your infant cries taught him to make a cradle of his arms. What would you even say? I cannot go with you to your father's house. Daddy, your father has been the shadow pressing at the necks of far too many women. Think of your sister. It is a choice to bridle the tongue, to play the saint, the peacemaker. Pray you aren't blessed for it, for kissing the shadow's gray cheek, for your weakness, for your father's sake. For all that you know, kneel before the silenced women and beg, be forgiven, be cursed. Your father says Grandpa stopped coming for Christmas because of you. It is not an accusation, but rather a statement of fact. I kept my father away from our home because he makes you uncomfortable. It's been 5 years since the fracture, and this is the first you and your father ever speak of it. You want this to be enough, but it is not. I kept my father from our home because he is a child molester, or I believe my sister, so how can it be? 2 winters ago, on the way home from gambling at Indian casinos and calling it charity, somewhere in fire country where the mountains slope steeper than a girl's strangled scream and the wind slips through dry grass with the hush of prayer, Daddy suggests you drop by his father's house because it is on the way, because you haven't seen him in years, because what reason could you have to stay away for so long anyway? Your mother agrees, and your silence is consent. Grandpa's house is red and innocent as a barn with lemons growing in the yard. He offers to pick some for you, and you let him. He smiles, and you make yourself amenable, flash your teeth as if everything were well. You can never outlive this, just as you cannot deny the subtext of your father's words, the plea in them deft as the undercurrent of the river you thrash about in panic, as if you'd never learned to swim, as if this were the origin of the saying, blood is thicker. Taste the iron in your cheeks and hear him. I kept my father from our home because I'm afraid you may divorce me too. You will never divorce your father, just as he will never divorce his. Whatever your father's sins, they remain within the limits of grace. You try to explain this to him, but somewhere in Memphis, a congregation is celebrating the sins of their pastor, his little sexual incident with a teenager, trip away from the path of righteousness. Even at this distance, you cannot help but hear the roar of the saints. Let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Let the mouths of children and children grown to women and children grown to men be filled to the brim with uncast rock, their teeth ground down from the friction, their throats sealed off, suffocated. You are trying to clear the stone, to feel its weight at the center of your palm, to pull back your arm and let it fly like a bullet towards the skull of Goliath or an arrow into the heart of what hurts you. You were trying to let it fly as if its target was not the flesh of a man you too had grown up loving. From above, reality must look like the ocean rushing in to thrash, to flood, to drag you bodily down. Your grandmother tells you she wishes she could have gone to the local pastor's funeral, but you can only witness the men who lost their youth beneath the hands of the father. You hope they are relieved by his death. Want to believe a person can be released from the worst of their life as an animal can scrape dead skin against the bark of a tree and be loosed from it. If only it were so simple. If only we could carry the memory of what was stolen like a second heavier skin to be shed at the end of winter. Is it always winter? Your grandmother says Auntie ought to give up dysfunction and move on as if it's that easy. When you are not careful, you too find yourself searching for a way out into delusion as if it could sustain you. Walk too far on those sands and they will swallow you. There must be limits to grace, no matter how desperately you pray that there aren't. Peace is never priceless nor easy. Remember that. Remember when your grandmother told you the story of Philip Bliss, how God took everything and he still declared it well, how you worried you never walk in that kind of grace. You are too much discontent. You will always feel the winds whipping the waves, the water burning in your chest. Don't resist it. Pray there is freedom for Auntie and the flutter of truth falling from her lips like rain. Pray for flood. Pray grace is strength to speak when everything says be silent. Let her never speak alone. Say it too. It is not well, it is not well, it is not well, it is not well, it is not well. Find your peace, but find your peace here. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. That was great. Our final reader tonight is Polly Rosenwake. Polly's story collection, Look How Happy I'm Making You, was published by Doubleday in 2019. Her stories, essays, and reviews have appeared in the O. Henry Prize Stories, Glimmer Train, the New York Times Book Review, the San Francisco Chronicle, and The Millions. She lives in Ann Arbor.
Thank you, Sewanee folks, Leanne, Gwen, and Brionne, Meg, and Kavita. Those were amazing readings. It's such a pleasure to read with you tonight. And thanks, folks, for tuning in. I'll try not to be too long. So my story collection, Look How Happy I'm Making You, is about women experiencing pregnancy and sort of the initial days, weeks, and months of becoming new mothers. So I'm going to read the beginning of a story from that collection. It's called 10 Warning Signs of Postpartum Depression. The story has 10 sections that are organized around these sort of clinical descriptors of symptoms of postpartum depression. And so after my first daughter was born, which was now more than a decade ago, I had a really hard time having a baby. And while I may indeed have had postpartum depression, I also found myself kind of resistant to sort of the way in which the condition was characterized. So in this work of fiction, I wanted to explore kind of the contrast between those clinical language around such symptoms and this very particular woman's experience. Thanks so much for listening. 10 warning signs of postpartum depression. 1, lack of interest in your baby. The baby is a minute old, an hour old, a day, a week. His skin is blotchy and yellowish, his eyes a blurry blue. He's like a woodpecker, bonking his head against your chest, drilling into your breasts, while you have to make like a tree and take it. He's a pirate with his guttural yawp, his phi on this expression, his wholesale seizure of your sleep. Like a disappointed old woman, pinched and furrowed, primed for complaint. When he's 15 days old, you change out of one pair of yoga pants and into another, grab the diaper bag, and strap the baby into the car seat. Your mother has flown home to her board meetings, her step classes, and her book club. Your husband is at the office, his shirt unwrinkled, his tie pulled tight. Be sure to leave the house today, he told you, and so you are leaving. But there's a long list of people and places you can't face. Not your friends who are mothers, not your friends who aren't mothers, not the grocery store, the library, the neighborhood. And so you drive to a dismal apartment building where Alex, just out of college, 14 years younger than you, has promised banana bread. He had offered to bring it over on his bike, but you told him you needed to get out of the house, and so he invited you here. Alex opens the door with a smile for the baby, asleep in the car seat. ¿Cómo estás? He exclaims, or I should say, ¿Cómo están ustedes? You know each other from Tertulia, a Spanish conversation group that meets Thursday nights at a Mexican restaurant, a group composed mostly of earnest Americans trying to work on their Spanish. Alex, skinny and sweet-faced with a gringo accent, seemed to look up to you simply because, in the hierarchy of non-native Spanish speakers sitting around the table munching chips and salsa, you were near the top. As a graduate student in comparative literature studying Latin American modernism, you've spent years learning Spanish. You're in the midst of a dissertation on Chilean revolutionary women poets, in the way one can be in the midst of a dissertation for going on 5 years now. But that is another depression that has, as of 15 days ago, been upended by the arrival of this other project that won't stand to wait around until you're in the mood to pay attention to it. We're all right. How are you? You're not here to speak Spanish. You're here because you thought you could keep from crying in front of this young, male, not quite friend. Kind of bad, actually, Alex says as you set the car seat down. My cat's been missing since last Friday. Oh no, what happened? She managed to get out when I was carrying laundry down to the basement and somehow escaped from the building. I put up signs and rode my bike all over looking for her. I'm so sorry. She always wanted to be free, he says gloomily. But wow, you have a baby. How did it go? I mean, his being born. You had the childbirth experience you'd wanted, a natural birth, meaning it hurts so much you thought something must be terribly wrong, even though you knew childbirth was supposed to feel worse than anything you'd ever experienced in your life. I can't do it, you kept screaming. And the midwife contradicted you gently, and she was right. But when the baby finally came out, you didn't feel triumphant so much as beaten into submission. It was okay, I guess. I mean, it was good in that he's healthy. I'm sorry, I don't know how to talk about it. I understand. I mean, I don't understand, of course. So do you want to sit down and have some tea? He gestures toward the single chair at a tiny table and gets the tea kettle going in the galley kitchen. The apartment is shabby and dreary, with a beige stained carpet and nothing on the walls but peeling paint. How long have you lived here? 4 months, since I graduated. I could have gotten a nicer place if I lived with roommates, but it's better for me to be alone. Or I don't know if it's better, but it's what I can deal with. And they allow cats here. Not that it matters now. He serves you a large, gooey slice of homemade chocolate chip banana bread. You eat that slice and then another. It's the only food that's tasted good since the birth. Alex perches on the corner of the bed with his tea mug. He tells you that he feels stuck. He's cashing in savings bonds from his dead grandmother and supposedly applying to grad school. He majored in history, but the idea of teaching high school history makes him very afraid. He thinks he should probably try to get a job in a coffee shop or a bakery, but he's worried that then he'll keep working in a coffee shop or bakery forever. Should he go to grad school? What should he do? And he is sorry to be laying all of this on you. You tell him that grad school has been bad for you, but it's probably not grad school's fault. You tell him he should find a way to leave the country immediately, go to Latin America, go anywhere exciting and cheap. You tell him you have no wisdom to offer, that age and experience mean only that you are older and have found ways to let years of your life go by. Too soon, always too soon, the baby wakes and starts gnawing on his fist. In a minute, he will realize that his fist can give him nothing. And you're not going to breastfeed him here in front of Alex. I better go before he freaks out. Alex jumps up to open the door, knocking over a stack of Mother Jones magazines balanced on a milk crate. I can't believe I just talked about my lame stuff when you're the one with the amazing new thing, new person. No, I'm interested. You step into the hallway, gripping the car seat. That banana bread was delicious. I hope you find your cat. Yeah, well, as you can see, I've got nothing going on. Come by anytime. He touches the baby's clenched hand. You too. 2. Lack of energy and motivation. Things to do. Reflect on the miracle of birth. Begin filling out pages in the fancy journal on your nightstand entitled Baby's First Year, recording weight, length, hair color, first impressions, etc. Use the stationery printed with Edwardian baby dolls, which you received as a gift, to write thank you notes for the stationery, the journey, and other adorable gifts. Consume oatmeal cookies, special recipe for lactating women, salmon, carrots, fennel seeds, fenugreek seeds, cumin seeds, and garlic in order to possibly increase your breast milk supply. Keep a round-the-clock chart of the baby's feeding times, sleeping times, and diaper changes, which may help to facilitate the illusion of control. Sign up for a postpartum yoga class or get a postpartum yoga DVD from the library and follow along, which may help to ease the reality of panic. Speak to the baby in Spanish, step 1 of his bilingual education. Read the stack of parenting books on your nightstand. Sleep when your baby is sleeping. Things you have done. Lamented the demise of the wet nurse. Watched the instructional video for the Moby Wrap newborn hug hold over and over and failed to recreate the Moby Wrap newborn hug hold on your own person. Read a pamphlet you received in the hospital entitled 10 Warning Signs of Postpartum Depression. Cried when your baby was crying. 3, negative feelings towards your baby. On the second visit to Alex's apartment, you decide to ditch your modesty and breastfeed while Alex works in the kitchen, his back discreetly turned. You set the writhing baby on the comforter, unlatch your nursing bra, stick a pillow on your lap, pick up the baby, and attempt to position him once, twice, 3 times. He grips your nipple with puckered lips. It kills. You pull him off and try again to aim him just so, to get him to open his mouth wider so it pinches you less. Big mouth, you whisper hopelessly. The baby understands neither English nor Spanish. Big mouth. One more frustrated try, then you give up and let him pinch. If you're to breastfeed for at least a year, as everyone says you should, that's roughly 6 times a day for at least 340 more days, a minimum of, say, 2,000 breastfeeding episodes. These precious early months with your infant, you wish them all away. Let him be sitting in a high chair on his first birthday with a plastic plate of cake, having learned to hold his head up, sit, wield a spoon, and eat unnutritious food, all in the blink of an eye. Let him be drinking from a sippy cup full of milk produced by a cow. Let him be then 1 year closer to the end of his childhood. Thanks so much.
Thank you. You're giving me flashbacks. Okay, thank you, everyone. Those were really, really wonderful readings. It's always such a pleasure to bring people together and hear such a variety of fabulous work. So thank you very much. We are now going to open things up to Q&A. Oh no, I forgot the round of applause. If everybody could unmute for just 1 second and give our wonderful readers a round of applause. Thank you. Okay, so Gwen will now take over and moderate the Q&A.
All right. God, thank you so much to all of our readers. Every single one of those readings was something so different and just so special. Thank you. So the way that we do our questions for these Zoom events is sort of have 2 options. One, if you'd love to put your question in the chat, I'll go ahead and read it to our readers. If you'd like to ask the question for yourself, go ahead and just use the raise hand feature so that I can see a little hand next to your name in the participants window, and then I'll call on you and you can unmute yourself and shoot our readers a question. I will take advantage as you guys ponder your questions of Leah, who during the reading said she was going to have a question. So if you have such a question on the tip of your tongue, I might call you out, Leah, to get us started.
Yeah, I'll put it, it's for Meg. I'll put it in the chat. Meg, I'm curious about what it means to write without prioritizing sound for a poet. In part, I'm gonna put that in part because I'm thinking about how we somehow uninternalize what we've been taught were objective standards in creative writing classes. Does that make sense, Gwen? So, sorry, writing and talking aloud is making me confuse myself. All right, because I'm thinking about how we uninternalize what we've been taught were objective standards in creative writing classes. So how did that change your use of language?
Thanks for typing that out for access for everyone. How to begin answering this question? I'm grateful for it because it's a thing that I'm thinking about a lot, but maybe from necessarily from a different perspective. How did it change my use of language? It's like I want to take your question, I want to like turn it inside out a little bit. The way that I conceive of or even conceptualize creative writing classes, the academy, the workshop space, the, I don't know, summer conference circuit, as it were, is sort of like an inherently and overtly ableist space, and it doesn't stop there, right? Obviously our historical or institutional memory begins in colonization and racism. It's classist, it's ableist, it's homophobic, it's sexist, it's, I mean, we could make a long list here tonight about all of the ways in which the table at which poetry began, or the lies that were told about the table at which poetry began, did not include any of us, was not built for any of us in this room. Are we in a room? In this space together. It's not meant for us, it's not meant to welcome us. It's largely exclusionary, at least in this country. And so it's difficult to then try to sort of like backpedal into the internalized understandings of what is objective and what is prioritized, what holds power, hierarchical power, and what is considered sort of supreme at that table, or even in this one. What do I make of the fact that I memorized hearing rhymes for the majority of my MFA program because I was told that my poems didn't have the right sound to them? Can you be a deaf poet writing in English? If it is that all contemporary, at least, though many historical definitions of poetics come to us through sonics, through lyricism, through understandings of musicality that have everything to do, supposedly, with hearing and the oral and the auditory, when you don't conceive of sound in that way. I have experiences of sound, but they aren't similar to people who perceive sound in different ways, which is the majority of hearing folks. And so when I think about internalizing or uninternalizing, I think about assimilation, and I think about the demands that we make on one another to assimilate in order to preserve our own comfort, and to preserve standards that uphold a kind of hierarchy that preserves the system as it is, which is like awards and, I don't know, fellowships and monies and grants and jobs. And when you break it down that way, that kind of language or that kind of approach to poetics is not a thing that I want to preserve, if that makes sense. And so trying to unlearn that and trying to it's not even reclamation, it's like going on some kind of scavenger hunt for like, what is my sound as a poet? You know, we as an educator, I prioritize talking with my students about voice, about the unique way in which an individual approaches a poem, about that being sort of paramount in the pursuit, right? You want to write the poem that nobody else can write. That's why you're writing it. The irreducible particularity of you, and yet we don't want it most of the time. we want it if it fits into like this very narrow definition of that we decided, which I think you're calling objective standards. And so my my use of language has maybe become more, I don't know, I just give less of a shit. Can I just say that? Like, I have no fucks left to give. And I say that carefully as someone who has quite a bit of privilege, not just as a white kid, but as someone who's oralized and someone who has institutional access. Obviously I have space to not give a shit, and space to explore that, what it might mean, and how to reclaim sound in a way, or not reclaim it at all. Maybe I just don't want sound. Unclear at this juncture. But language, I think, is, despite it being our material, is so deeply overlooked as a site of power. And I think that that's maybe what has changed for me, is I want to use my power, which is my language, in a different way. I don't know that I've tended your question very well, but I got some cussing in there, so I feel good about it.
No, I think that was a beautiful answer. Thank you.
Anytime we can get cussing in, I think is a good time. And we have the wonderful Norris in the chat asking what he says is a semi-related question, but it's kicked out to all of our readers. So he says, Meg, you mentioned having to unlearn some things in your writing process with your current manuscript. I definitely relate to this. What's one thing you've each had to unlearn about writing recently? Any tricks for bringing a beginner's mind to each new piece you work on? So I think those are a two-part question. Maybe you would want to address the first part or the second part, kind of whatever grabs you, readers.
I mean, super technical. I had to unlearn sort of longer lines in the past, I don't know, years or so. They normally suited me, and then I was like, actually I could be doing something, if I break these, I can be finding some exciting things. And it was uncomfortable, but I am in a writing group where I just sort of write every week. So I had the space to just try stuff, I don't know, I just say try it. You don't have to show anyone, or you can,
That's such a great question, Norris. And I'll just say the piece that I read tonight is probably, at the time, maybe still till now, a piece where I took the most chances. In the opening, I don't explain what you're hearing, what it is, that you're hearing. You hear a kind of string of things that, and names of people and concepts and all of that. And that was a big thing for me as a writer, I think, particularly because I came from the social change space. And that's when, in the beginning of writing, is when I had to really unlearn how I had been writing, which was like policy briefs and all of it was about prioritized clarity and explaining things to everybody. And in this piece, I remember thinking, I'm going to trust the reader. I'm going to trust the reader. I'm going to trust myself also, but I'm going to trust the reader, and I'm going to trust the material. And I started in that space, and that kind of really allowed me to kind of go forth. And so I guess, if it's useful to you, trusting the reader, I think sometimes we are made to feel like, like that what we're talking about is too complex, or, but I think starting there, because exactly what, Brionne said, is that, like, try, it's, and I'm so glad that I did. So thanks for that question.
For me, I guess so my story collection came out in 2019. And I feel so lucky that like I got to do everything I wanted to do like right before the pandemic, and I feel so bad for people who didn't get to do those things when their books came out. But I have not done much writing since then, and because my story collection was very focused on this particular topic of pregnancy and new motherhood, and I sort of could like assign myself stories about things that I knew that I wanted to write about. I am now cast back into the realm of like, what do I even want to write about? So I feel like I'm very much at the beginning of like, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? And I don't know that I have any tips, but I guess the one thing for me is that I've just sort of been allowing myself to like start one thing. And I mean, especially with stories where I have such a problem with plot and structure and having things happen, even though I am a fiction writer and I know things have to happen. I've just been sort of following like, am I interested in writing this story right now? Am I interested in pursuing this? Or am I just kind of filing it away in a maybe I will finish this later file, and just sort of staying focused on like, where is the energy going? What do I really want to write right now? Because without that, it is way too much of a slog for me. So that's the muddle that I'm in at the moment, post story collection.
Thank you all. We've got a question from Brionne Wheeler in the chat. She says, for all the readers, firstly, thank you. And then how do you resist that urge to overindulge with details? And or what is your process for reducing your language from how you conceived something in your thoughts down to what the reader actually needs to know to understand? A good question, but a big one. I'm like thinking about this for myself now. I'm like, God, how do I do that when I write a story?
I'll also say that in the class that I teach, I have one of the things I talk about is this notion of context versus narrative. And I mean, they're not necessarily totally oppositional, but it helps to kind of set it up that way. And so I guess the first thing is to know, like if you're writing a piece that is where you do want to have a lot of details and, because of where you're writing it for, what your aims are, so that you're really starting with what is your aim for what you're writing. And so maybe it does merit, the details and all the, all the nuance. And then, conversely, if it doesn't, you prioritize the narrative, and anything that's in there that doesn't serve the narrative, you chuck out. So that's, and particularly I think in nonfiction, there is sometimes this habit, because we have these pet projects or this topic that we're so passionate about, or an issue that we feel so strongly about. So we go deep, into it, and we have all this research, and sometimes we try to shoehorn that research into things because we did the research and you don't want it to go to waste, and that's can get you into trouble, because then the piece bloats, and you can tell that the container doesn't fit the so I don't know if that's helpful. I think thinking about it in terms of maybe it is a piece, and the biggest thing is that you probably have to choose for a specific piece, but you don't necessarily have to choose forever. You can write different kinds of ways about the same topic. So hope that's helpful.
I was thinking about my answer as you were speaking, Kavita, and sort of, or even before, and sort of feeling, I don't know, it just sort of like feels right, like it doesn't feel right when there's too much things, on the page, because I'm a poet. But then you said, cut what doesn't serve the narrative. And I thought, well, I think what I'm doing is cutting what doesn't serve the music for me, because that's sort of what guides my ear through a poem, and what doesn't serve the truth too. Because at the end of the day, I'm not trying to just make something that sounds pretty. I want to say the truth. But if I could say the truth, I don't need a lot just like get it in there as tightly as possible. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's different for poets. I start to feel like, oh my God, I've labored if anything's longer than a page. Even saying that as someone who read very long poems tonight, it took a long time. Like I wrote those sections over like years, really. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess I should add to that poem. Yeah.
Yeah, Brionne, I'm curious, what genre do you write in? Is this aimed toward a particular genre or for multiple
I typically write in fiction. I'm recently going through like a bigger nonfiction essay kick, and so I just felt like it was hopefully applicable to each of you, maybe perhaps differently. So I just wanted to hear everyone's thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, for fiction, I would say, totally indulge in the details, right? Because I feel like the details, sharp, interesting, surprising details are kind of everything, initially anyway, right? Like getting all of those interesting details down, right? And then, I mean, I think as Kavita is saying, like figure out what's relevant and what's not, and always save the things that might not be relevant for this particular story for something else, if you really love them.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think Kavita's point about, trusting that the reader will get it, that the reader will get certain things from your details that you don't necessarily need to explain. But yeah, I would start by totally indulging the details and seeing where that takes you.
Yeah, I co-sign on indulgence. I don't think it's bad to love what you're doing or to find pleasure in it. And I appreciate what everyone's saying about sort of the end result. But maybe it's just where I'm at with my own work, but I feel really resistant to any idea that one might put forward that there is a particular, I don't know, honor or badge in restraint or constraint without purpose. I don't know that you can overindulge in details in the drafting of a thing. I don't know about the final making, but yeah, I might just push you in that direction. All of us, myself included.
Thank you all. Declan, I see we've got your hand up.
Yeah, let me just type this in the chat. So I was just wondering for Polly about if your work is kind of responding in some way to some of the dominant discourses about motherhood, and if you could just say a little about like how you're maybe offering an alternative to some of the ways that we tend to talk about that.
Yeah, thanks. Absolutely. That was my goal. I mean, my experience of having a baby was not like, oh, I'm so joyous and happy in every moment. It's just wonderful. That was not how I felt at all. And so I very much was writing out of feeling not sure about this motherhood thing. And thinking, I mean, I don't know that I was thinking about this immediately at the time, but sort of thinking back now to some of the books that I read, like during pregnancy, some of the sort of guides to pregnancy or to caring for a newborn, were I to turn to them now, like 10 years after having my first baby, I think I might be appalled by some of them. So yeah, I really was writing towards wanting to feel less alone in my own kind of frustrations, physical pain, emotional difficulties around having a baby. And I mean, I think there have been so many books that have come out, in recent years that do that, that I've been really grateful for. So yeah, thanks for noticing that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to all of our readers for your reading, for your wonderful answers to our questions. this has been such a rich night of literature, and thank you so much for sharing your words with us tonight. It's been a real pleasure, and it's getting me even more amped for the Sewanee Writers Conference in July, when we're going to have the chance to do this in person for the first time in 2 years.
Yeah, that was really terrific, both the reading and the Q&A. Thank you all so much. And Brionne, I'm a fiction writer, and I also feel like I've labored after I finish a page. So, and I think we should just, we get to feel like that.
Thank you. Thank you. So validated.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.